Uh, Good morning, good evening. Good morning for our speakers online. Good evening from the Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm a board member here, and I'm the chair of the program committee. And I wanted to encourage you all to get a drink, order some dinner, and settle in for an evening of discussion about media freedom and what's going on with Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. But before we get into the substance of that discussion, I wanted to say a few words about our programs here at the Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand and what makes them tick. We're all volunteers here, so when you see a program like this one, it's because one of those volunteers, or sometimes several of them, like this time with myself and Tommy Walker, who's just joined us from the construction site, the deconstruction site, which was impacted by the earthquake. We're organizing. And usually it's because we've come up with some idea, we've brainstormed the issues, we've located and reached out to speakers, and we've coordinated to bring a program together and then work to promote and publicize it. Needless to say, it's hard, but worthwhile work, and we're always looking for people with good ideas to join us. We hold a monthly program meeting, and if you're interested in learning more about that and how to get involved, please contact me after the program. But the real reason I raise this is that this past week, we lost one of the best, who was part of the lifeblood of the programs here at the Foreign Correspondent Club of Thailand. I'm talking about Gwen Robinson, who was editor-at-large of the Nikkei Asia magazine, and was also a senior fellow at the Institute of Security and International Studies at Chulalongkorn University. She was a longtime correspondent of the Financial Times before that. And Gwen was also a past president of the FCCT, serving 2 terms from 2019 to 2021. It was a privilege and honor to work with Gwen, who, despite being incredibly busy with her multiple day jobs and frequent international travel, was always stepping up to organize an incredible range of programs and projects here at the FCCT. Myanmar was often her top priority, and she organized more programs than I can count about that country and the plight of the people there. So this week, as we're looking at what is happening in Myanmar with the earthquake and the continued tragedy there, you know, I'm sure she would want to be organizing a program on that. But she did more than just organize panels. She led the way after the February 2021 military coup in Myanmar in finding money and equipment for Burmese journalists who were forced to flee the country with little more than the clothes on their backs. And she helped find overseas resources for beleaguered journalists facing authoritarian regimes in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Her commitment to media freedom and helping journalists in trouble means that if she was still here with us, I'm sure she would be sitting right here at the VIP table with a group of interested diplomats, humanitarians, and others that she would have invited to hear this stellar panel of experts today and hear what they have to say. And she would have been at the microphone during the Q&A later to ask a sharp, well-thought-out question that would focus on what these Trump cuts mean for media freedom and access to information for the people of Myanmar. So the FCCT will be holding a wake for Gwen this coming Friday, 4 April, starting at 6:30 p.m., to sing her praises, to tell stories about her, and share remembrances of her remarkable life. And that will be open to all who wish to come. So let me now turn to our program this evening. In what has been already dubbed Bloody Saturday, the Trump administration ordered the U.S. Agency for Global Media to cut off funds to Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and other U.S.-supported media on March 15th. VOA immediately placed on indefinite leave over 1,300 journalists and staff and ceased broadcasting for the first time in its 83-year history. RFA, which receives a separate congressional appropriation, has had to furlough at least 75% of its journalists and staff since its funds are dispersed through the USAGM, which has refused to make transfers to continue operations. Now, it is amazing that RFA is still continuing to put content up on their website and continuing. Some of their people are still reporting from Myanmar in this crisis of the earthquake. So they're doing what they can, but it's a ghost of its former self. And along with other broadcasters affected by this move who are focused on Eastern Europe, the Middle East and Cuba, the shuttered media reached more than 420 million people in 63 languages in over 100 countries each week. Not surprising, the authoritarians across Asia and the world were cheering these shutdowns. You know, the China state media, of course, attacked Voice of America. They called it a dirty rag. Its foreign minister described it as a lie factory. Former Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen cheered the cut of RFA, calling it fake news. Meanwhile, the U.S. National Press Club, which I recently learned Steve Herman has joined the board there, meanwhile said that the actions, quote, undermine America's longstanding commitment to a free and independent press. So VOA journalists and leadership of RFA and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty have all filed lawsuits against the U.S. government and against the USAGM to reverse these actions and keep broadcasters open. And we'll hear more about those lawsuits and the ongoing legal actions from our panelists. Let me add on a personal that as soon as these cuts were made, I ran into a senior foreign correspondent here in Bangkok for one of the major TV broadcasters, and he immediately said to me that this is devastating because RFA breaks so many stories from countries that it works on, and it's critical to keep track of what is happening in far-flung countries that he has to cover. And I would agree. In my own work as the former Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch for 15 years, I would say that I relied on RFA, its sister agency Beinar News, and the VOA to keep track of developing stories in the region. They were all part of my obligatory morning read at the start of the workday, and invariably, I would often hear from them and their journalists seeking comments as the day went on and news stories came up. So there's a lot at stake here that the Trump administration is trying to throw away. And to learn more, first we're going to hear from Steve Herman, who's the Chief National Correspondent of Voice of America and a board member of the U.S. National Press Club. Then we'll hear from Rohit Mahajan, who's the Chief Communications Officer for Radio Free Asia. Then we'll hear from Tommy Walker, who is an FCCT board member and a Bangkok-based reporter for VOA, who's joined us in the club. And finally, we'll hear from Antoine Bernard, who is the Director of Advocacy and Assistance for Reporters Sans Frontières. So let me turn first to Steve and give him the floor for some comments. After the comments of all the speakers, we'll have a question and answer, in which time you'll have a chance to discuss some of your questions and get more information.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone, from Widewater, Virginia, where it is just about 8:15 on Wednesday morning. And I want to join in sending condolences for the passing of Gwen Robinson, who I also knew over a number of decades, a stellar journalist and a great friend to many in the club and across the region. Very saddened to hear the news. As Phil mentioned, within the U.S. Agency for Global Media family, we're facing an existential crisis. And there are a number of entities under USAGM, the Voice of America and Radio and TV Marti, which is under the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, are 100% federal entities. And then there are the grantees, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Middle East Broadcasting Networks, which are Radio Sawa and Al Hurra Television. They rely on grants. They are not part of the federal government. So the legal actions that are underway are a little bit different. I don't know how much in the weeds you want to get on all of that, but suffice it to say that RFE and RFA are really at the mercy of USAGM, giving them the grant money, that Congress has allocated to them, and they are plaintiffs in separate lawsuits. Where here in the United States, VOA, as 100% part of the federal government, can't be a plaintiff against its parent agency, but the legal actions are being fronted by staffers of the Voice of America. I'm a declarant in a primary lawsuit that was brought in New York with Patsy Udakaswara, who is my successor as White House bureau chief, as the lead plaintiff on that case. I'm also involved through my union, the American Foreign Service Association, and we have a number of other co-plaintiffs and major organizations supporting us, including Reporters Sans Frontières and Democracy Forward and other such groups. And we've had a significant initial victory with a judge, a federal judge in New York, issuing a temporary restraining order. All it does is freeze things in place. The Voice of America has been off the air since the middle of March. There's no television programming, no radio programming. The signals are down. We have a weekly combined audience of about 350, 360 million people. They're not receiving any news and information. Our reporters, everyone at VOA, has been on paid administrative leave since the middle of the March, not allowed to do any work, not allowed to go in to VOA headquarters or any of the bureaus around the world. And of those 1,350 staffers, about 550 are contractors. They were all told that their contracts were to be terminated by the end of March as a result of the temporary restraining order. They are not being immediately terminated. And then the most dire situation, we did have some probationary employees who were cut loose before the middle of March, and the TRO does not cover them, so they're out of work. And both in that probationary category and in our staff category, we have a number of J1 visa holders. These are journalists from all around the world, including Thailand, who were given visas by the US government to come work as broadcasters at the Voice of America. They were all informed that their visas were immediately expiring since they no longer had jobs and would have to return to their home countries within a month. The big tragedy is some of those people are from countries such as Russia, Belarus, Vietnam, Hong Kong, and others, where for various reasons, if they were to return home, some of them are already basically on hit lists. They would be prosecuted, imprisoned, or even worse. So the absolute number one priority for all of us is to keep our journalists who are essentially facing deportation from the United States out of harm's way. And then we're looking forward to having a judge issue a preliminary injunction and possibly ordering our parent agency to send us back to work. But as I've said in many, many interviews, the damage has been done, irreparable harm to our audiences who have lost vital information. Because take, for example, what's happening in Myanmar right now, where VOA's Burmese service is off the air. I'll be curious to hear what sort of service is left at RFA in Burmese right now. The Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, in times of civil conflict, disasters, natural and man-made, epidemics, gets in vital information to fill a vacuum that's often fraught with disinformation or no information. And we all know what happens in those particular situations. There can be unrest and fear and panic and all sorts of things. So it's vital to get back on the air, not only in Burmese, but at the Voice of America in our 48 other languages as well. So I'll stop my remarks right there. Of course, happy to answer any questions, Phil. So back to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much. Let me now turn to Rohit for the perspective from RFA.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you for inviting all of us to be a part of this event at the FCCT. This, of course, is an issue that affects U.S. media, as the invitation, the title of the event says, affects our organizations, but it's really an issue about journalism writ large. There's fewer and fewer, as Steve was just saying, sources that go into these places that are so important. Fewer and fewer sources that get the news to folks who are it's in their own languages. That is what RFA is charged to do, and it just behooves all of us to kind of take up this flag in terms of what we can do to support each other, to support, of course, most importantly, people getting the news that's accurate and fact-based during this time. Also want to extend condolences on behalf of RFA to Gwen Robinson. She was a dear friend to us and had written many pieces supporting all of our work. As Steve was just saying about some of the visa issues, we too have a lot of concerns about journalists who work for us, who come from countries who really power our work. I mean, these are folks who are from Vietnam, from Laos, Cambodia, China, and RFA, it was created essentially on a surrogate model of journalism, and that is providing the local news, were it to be independent, were it to be free, available to all people, and it's really its whole structure and everything is powered by the idea that we have reporters who are from these places who know intimately the issues and who have networks of their own sources that they can tag. I mean, a good example of that is the Uyghur story in Xinjiang. I mean, were it not for the fact that we have journalists who are from that area, who were born there, grew up there, carry these sources back with them to the United States, and from Virginia, we're able to make dead of night phone calls and then verify information with police stations and other authorities. Who knows if the whole genocide essentially would have been broken and exposed to the world. So in that way, we're losing something here that's so important, obviously, for our audiences, but also for a public record that really helps policymakers, that really helps researchers. I don't know how many people I talk to on a daily basis from the Hill, from DOD, from other agencies who say, we really rely on your reports. Of course, it's a window into the lives of the people to whom we are trying to reach, but it's also a window to people outside of these countries, and particularly in ones that want to do something about it. Of course, Phil was just talking about how we are sometimes a rough draft. I've heard this many times from others, Sophie Richardson and other human rights advocates, that we're almost like a rough draft of history, is that, the first raw report that comes out of a situation sometimes is from Radio Free Asia. With Myanmar, and of course, we extend our condolences to the victims of the quake, we are just in a skeleton sort of makeshift mode. We have just a few people who are in Myanmar. We had to actually relieve a lot of them. We furloughed, as Phil was saying, 75% of our staff in DC. We still have our international staff, but a lot of our contractors, we had no other choice but to sever relationships because we are just drawing down at this point on our reserves. We're not getting any funding or anything like that. I can talk a little bit more about the courts and the situation that faces us. We have our own filings, and I can get into that, but I would like to hear from the others before I continue and answer questions. Thanks again. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you very much, Rohit. Now I'm going to turn to Tommy Walker. Tommy is an FCCT board member and was reporting for Voice of America for, I think, better part of 5 years. He has a perspective here in Bangkok as someone who is a journalist working for a number of different outlets, trying to string it all together. And turn it over to you to sort of share your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say about VOA, what I really liked about them. I've worked in media for a long time, whether it's travel or news. It's a bigger loss than I ever would have imagined. I mean, especially here in Asia. I mean, like Phil touched on, I've been working with them on a freelance basis regularly for 5 years. Some of the issues I've covered with VOA includes the Hong Kong protests, which were huge at the time in 2019, followed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thailand then had its own protests of its own. And then we had the Myanmar coup, which is turned into civil war. You know, I started with VOA in Hong Kong, and they let me cover all of that. And I think what I'm always full of praise about them and their editorial is that if you have the knowledge, if you have the trust, if you have the knowledge, if you have the will, they will give you the trust. And unlike other media outlets, VOA seem to cover so much. You can preview things, you can review things, you can do breaking news, you can do feature stories, you can do multimedia. There's such an array of different ways of reporting that they allowed me and other journalists to do. And I think we've already seen it. There's such a gap, there's a hole already within the last few weeks because there's been no VOA and RFA reporting. So for me personally, I think it's, you know, when we were looking at the elections and what was going to come of that last year, there was a feeling, and I'm sure VOA staff have said this in Washington, there was a feeling that things were going to change. I think we're all surprised, whether it's staff or myself as a freelancer, how abruptly things have gone. It's just a crying shame because, I mean, especially if you look around the world, VOA, it provides so much. I mean, I was in Ukraine a couple of years ago reporting. I wasn't actually reporting for VOA. And the Ukrainians, the soldiers, were saying, "What do you do in Asia?" And I said, "I work for VOA." And everyone knows VOA. And this is really appreciative of their legacy, their reporting. And, you know, it's a sad day for journalism, obviously, when the shutdown happened, Bloody Saturday. And it's just going to affect a lot of local journalists. Journalism and media is changing anyway, as we know, through different platforms. But VOA was trying to keep on top of that and was. And it provided so much... so many articles. I mean, I go back to that. Other media outlets as big as the BBC and other broadcasters, there was a lot that VOA would commission and want to report on. And I think it's probably bigger than I've ever realized in terms of the impact it's had. And not just myself. I know there's obviously other journalists who work for VOA in the region, whether it's English services or local languages, and they've been affected. And a lot of us, including myself, depended a lot on working for VOA, you know, it's had a big impact here, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. But there's been, you know, a lot of damage already done. Whether or not VOA can ever go back to its once self, I don't think so. But you know, it's such a great asset for the world. I'm not talking about for America, for the world. The information flow is incredible, and I just think it's a sad day, really. So I think, yeah, I don't know what else to say, really. But I mean, I can talk about my own reporting if you want to ask me later in terms of specific reports. But as a reporter, yeah, it's I can't thank them enough. I think they've been amazing. The best editorial team I've ever worked with, and we've worked on topics like press freedom. In fact, I was part of the press freedom team in 2021 that won the AIB awards because we reported on what was happening in Burma, and one of my reports was highlighted as part of that award, as part of the team's award. So we've done some amazing work, and it's such a shame that can't continue in its current form. I hope it can in some other way, but yeah, it's a sad loss.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully temporary loss. But
Hopefully temporary loss.
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So now I'm going to turn to Antoine Bernard, who's with RSF. RSF also joined the lawsuit that Steve Herman was speaking about. And I would ask him to talk a little bit about that, but also talk about what's happening here with these various entities and what it means for press freedom in the world.
Good evening and good afternoon from Paris here. It's 2:30 p.m. It's a pleasure to be with you. My predecessors here on the mic highlighted impact on the audience and their right to access trustworthy information, the impact on media freedom and very, very important medias. I'd like just to complement here, flagging the impact on journalists' safety, just to complement the picture. Because to date, we have 11 USAGM media journalist employees imprisoned worldwide, 5 in Vietnam, 2 in Russia, 1 in Belarus, 1 in Azerbaijan, 2 in Myanmar. Some are serving particularly harsh sentences, such as Shin Dawei, who is a contributor to RFA's Burmese service, and who's been sentenced to life in prison, later reduced to 15 years on spurious charges of terrorism. Two Vietnamese freelance journalists who worked with the outlet are currently detained. That's Trung Di Nhat, sentenced to 10 years in 2020, and then Nguyen Trung Thai, sentenced to 11 years in prison in 2021. At least 84 USAGM media journalists based in the US on work visas now face deportation to countries where they could face persecution and severe harassment. At least 15 journalists from RFA and 8 from VOA, originating from countries and territories such as Belarus, Cambodia, China, Hong Kong, Russia, Vietnam, are at serious risk of being immediately arrested upon arrival and potentially imprisoned if deported, according to the two outlets, to your colleagues. RSF is also confirming a number of freelance journalists who are under threats due to termination of their work, often in countries dangerous for press freedom. That's China, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, etc. And according to our first estimation, at least 1,000 of them used to work with media such as RFA and VOA. Just to complement the picture. Another complementary aspect of the picture is that RSF considers that it has itself been suffering irreparable harm from that decision. One, in our correspondence network's ability to report, advocate, and ensure their own security. And second, in the weakening, to say the least, of public's rights to access trustworthy sources of information that have been gravely impaired by the elimination of USAGM's media, and especially VOA, as you say, because we've been joining VOA in the lawsuit. Indeed, the decision on 28 March, that's Friday night, by District Judge Otken to grant the motion for temporary restraining order was indeed welcome. We're now, as Stephen said, expecting the preliminary injunction, hopefully in the next 2 weeks at best. Now, another challenge would be, if we get it, the challenge of the implementation of the court decision by the administration. And nothing is written in advance in that regard. To conclude, just to tell you, yesterday, together with a coalition of 35 NGOs, PEN America and RSF, led the sending of a joint letter to members of US Congress to continue to increase the pressure, shed light on the situation, highlight the risks, as we all highlighted here on different aspects for this situation that emanate from that situation. What's interesting, and maybe a final comment, is that be it RFERL with the judge federal judge in DC, or ourselves in that complaint in New York with Judge Otken, I think we found a very principled, legally sound-based judicial answer. The reasoning by the judge in our case is extremely clear that the decision is illegal, is unconstitutional, is in addition discriminatory, and that was a very interesting point, a discrimination based on the very and sole practice of independent journalism that motivated the administration decision. That's an interesting point in the decision. The decision, of course, is online, and so we encourage you to read it, be it from our lawyers or on RSF website. And it's only the first steps of a very, very, very difficult battle. And I conclude just saying how honored and proud we are to be together with you and try to be useful in this battle. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No, that's very helpful. We're going to move to question and answer since someone set up a microphone. But I'm going to ask the first question, which is to all of you. You know, I've seen the Trump administration and various different people associated with it, including a statement from the White House calling Voice of America the voice of the radical left, and denigrating the international broadcasting services that are under the USAGM. I mean, as far as you can tell, what is motivating this, you know, really drastic decision to eliminate, you know, a U.S.-funded voice in the world, albeit with, you know, independent editorial control? But I mean, you're talking about basically wiping out what the United States was saying to the world. What is motivating this?
Who wants to answer? Who wants to start? Steve?
Well, I'm going to slightly punt on this one since I was under investigation even before all this happened for alleged speculating and analysis on VOA programs. So I'm trying to stick to the facts. As far as the allegations that Phil noted that have come from the White House and others putting these labels, radical, we've heard, communists, spies, you know, all this stuff. Actually, we heard this 4 years ago during the end of the first Trump administration when they came after me and a number of my colleagues, as well as USAGM executives, and also went after people for, you know, alleged problems with security clearances, et cetera, et cetera. And even at that time, I remarked that it smacked of McCarthyism. VOA in the 1950s was attacked for being too leftist and having, you know, communists in the newsroom and all this. So it's nothing new. And what I say is, for anyone who has questions about the balance of VOA, and we're mandated by law to be fair and balanced. I like to say the Voice of America is one of the only news organizations in the world. I think Deutsche Welle is another one, where there's a law that says it must be balanced, and we, in our particular case, with our charter, must reflect the different significant viewpoints of American thought and institution. That means the Voice of America cannot be the voice of the Democratic Party or the voice of the Republican Party or the voice of any particular president. And as I wrote in my book, plug right there, Behind the White House Curtain, there's been a struggle for the soul of the Voice of America since the end of World War II. And a lot of members of Congress and others said the war is over, we don't need a government-funded broadcaster anymore. But of course, we had the Cold War, and so VOA was allowed to survive with the caveat legally that it could not target or broadcast to Americans or to the United States, the Smith-Moon Act. So we've always had our critics on both the left and the right. And on social media, of course, I would always see people criticizing headlines from both the left and the right. And I figured, if I'm getting criticism from both sides, I must be doing a pretty good job. But lately, there has been some online attacks from high-ranking officials in the U.S. government targeting me personally and VOA. I've been called engaging in treasonous behavior by one of them. So it's gotten rather serious and personal. But I say, while it's still up, voanews.com, it's been frozen now in amber for a few weeks. You can look at our stories. You can search my name or anybody else's name, look through all our stories about whether it's about Thailand, stuff that Tommy has done, or any of the other reporters over the past decade or so. I think it's all online. and people can draw their own conclusions on that. So that's all I'll say about that right now.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I can add briefly. I mean, obviously working for VOA, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, just add to Steve's point, there's many times when I've had my reports in for editing, and there's a thorough process of balance. And you know, I've worked with a few of the media outlets, and you know, VOA is, I think, one of the few that allows that, has that. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's what I want to add to that as well. Even if I'm writing about things which are, you know, I mean, I can just imagine Hong Kong, for example. Everyone was criticizing China and the Communist Party, but VOA was like, you need more of the China voice. You need the balance, you know, and that's important. And it's something that you might not think, because of VOA gets criticized unfairly, but there is balance editors there, and it's important to know that. And I think as well, with any criticism Steve was talking about, you know, we live in a world now with social media. It's very easy to criticize, you know, talk about headlines. I think more people need to know about how it works in the media before they criticize. And people sometimes don't like reports, they start to criticize it. Well, unfortunately, the world is full of sad stories, whether you like it or not. But no, I can just say, add my 2 cents. When I've worked for VOA, they've always said there must be a balance with reporting, and they've helped me do that. And yeah, I just think it's a great outlet, and it's always offered. It's always been fair.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn to we have a question. Can you identify yourself, and if you have any association, and tell us who you're directing the question to?
Matthew Rafat, Lotto Knot Agency. Herman, let's try him. I think what all of you have not said has been more astounding than what you've said. None of you have talked about money laundering in Ukraine. None of you have talked about judicial corruption. You had an entire class of people, of lawyers in the United States, going after one man in a way that was nonpartisan. None of you talked about that. California this year changed its law on restraining orders in a way that minimizes freedom of speech in a state where the governor is likely to run for president. None of you have talked about that. I actually asked all my friends, do any of you actually listen? Sure, I'm giving context, because I don't want this to be some sort of non-critical love fest.
But there's other people waiting to ask questions too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the question is, why do you deserve any taxpayer money, given that you've been so negligent in covering essentially every single major story in the last 5 years? Now, I don't mean to put the blame solely on you. Obviously, the lawyers failed. You've got, since 2001, technology companies and algorithms have been dictating our lives. But the fact of the matter is, Trump would not be in office today, nor in 2016, unless the class of lawyers and journalists failed. So why do you deserve money? Well, let's back up.
Okay,
do you at least acknowledge that you failed? That we are now living in a time where more people than ever before hate the United States, and more people than ever before like China. Do you at least acknowledge that? And if so, do you acknowledge, again, that you failed as a class?
Can you repeat your name, please, just for the record?
What was your name?
I didn't hear it.
What was your name, please?
They're asking what your name was?
I just said it now.
Matthew.
R-A-F-A-T.
Matthew Rafet.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the question from Matthew to the panel.
I would just say, you know, if you are interested in a particular subject, go look at the archive I just mentioned, voanews.com, and you can search for what stories we have or have not done on a particular subject. RFA has a different particular mission. It's not digging deep into every story that's going on in the United States. Our mission is, as far as U.S. coverage, is to reflect significant thought and institution. We are not, as journalists, we don't give opinions, and Tommy can tell you what, as he just mentioned, what the editorial process is like for stories that he may pitch and how many editors it goes through to assure it has balance. But I can assure you that there is always going to be criticism that we could have done more stories about this subject, or we should have focused less on that. These are decisions. I can tell you that reporters are free to suggest stories on their beat, or they may be assigned stories by editors, and it's quite a collaborative process. But there's always going to be criticism, I think, about any news institution, that they're slanted one way or the other. They've done too many stories about a particular topic or not another topic. As far as the question about why we deserve taxpayer money, I've said this repeatedly. The cost of the Voice of America, for example, is less than 2 fighter jets. Okay, we're at an extremely tiny part of the federal budget. The entire budget for USAGM overall is less than $1 billion for all of the entities that I mentioned at the beginning. Even before all this, there was not fat on the bone at any of these organizations. We can all tell you stories about how we scrambled just to look for a little bit of extra money to assign a reporter to go somewhere and take great risk to get a story done. We are probably the best bang for the buck in terms of public diplomacy for the United States. It's the hard edge of soft power, and there is a consistent argument put forward, not by just me, but by academics, diplomats who study this, that whether it's USAID or USAGM, having this presence of the United States out there saves lives and can help prevent wars in the future. And you'll even hear that from military officials as well. Thank you.
Does anybody else, others on the panel want to comment on that?
Yeah, if I may, because the question in fact highlights, and I like this very much, the importance of pluralism, if I understood properly. And indeed, take VOA, take RFA, they bring pluralism for audience in situations where they do not enjoy pluralism, where they don't have the luxury of choosing among a plurality of trustworthy sources of information. So, yeah, indeed, in stopping USAGM media, it's closing down pluralism for the audience in those countries. So what's the reason for all this? If it's not financial neither, because as Steve highlights, indeed, RFERL is, I think, 150 million a year. VOA is 200 and so a year. So frankly, it's really not much. If it's not financial neither, then isn't it mainly ideological? Well, journalism is not about ideology. It's about independence, pluralism, and freedom. And I think this takes us together.
Okay. Others on the panel want to respond, or? Okay, if not, next question, please.
Hi, good evening. I'm Michael Bossacu. I'm a proud overseas member of the club. I'm former South China Morning Post, former Asia Times, former CNN Opinion. Now I'm freelance, but connected with the Atlantic Council. I'm now based in Ukraine, and a couple of comments if I can, and then I'll get quickly to a question. But the question about why is it happening now, I would not be surprised in the least if what's happening to VOA and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in particular, was on their list of concessions that the Russians gave to Trump when they were meeting in Saudi Arabia, and said, get rid of them. I mean, that's the kind of era we're in. But this is a topic very close to my heart because I'm old enough to remember listening to VOA behind the Iron Curtain on shortwave radio, crackling, whether I was there or Tajikistan. And I've worked very closely with a lot of the VOA staff, especially the Ukrainian service based in Washington. I'm telling you, these are among the hardest working journalists and very, very professional. And they actually have an award-winning investigative program in Ukraine called SCHEM or Schemes. They've broken incredible stories, not only about oligarchs in Ukraine, but also about Zelensky. And just quickly,
Right.
there's also Miroslava Gongadze, their Eastern European correspondent, one of the best.
Please your question, yeah.
Okay, so for RFERL, the budget was mentioned. It's about 142 million, 800 full-time staff, 800 freelancers. But what's happening right now is there are a lot of, as you guys well know here, journalists in exile from Ukraine, Belarus, Myanmar, you name it. It's, Iran, there's a number growing. And a lot of these are displaced journalists, and they're not really captured as staff or freelancers by VOA, RFE, Radio Liberty, or the others. Do any of you feel there is a kind of mechanism that we can harness their talents? Because, I'm ending, a lot of them, for example, are in Europe from Ukraine and Belarus and Russia. They're not working in the craft, and there's a fear that we may lose their talent. So do you think they can somehow be absorbed in the media ecosystem and do some great reporting? Thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, I'm happy to talk a little bit about this.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no, we are really concerned. I mean, for RFA, I mentioned earlier that our work is really powered by the people who are doing this on the and we don't know where things are going to go. We have these court cases. Perhaps we can get some money out of the current budget and things like that, but that would just sustain our organization to keep it afloat. We probably won't be in a position to just hire back everybody we're furloughing, and certainly not our contractors. And it's really important that they find work and that they continue to do this work, because I feel like that's one thing that VOA and Radio Free Asia have both done, is that we've been able to harness talents, to grow those talents, and people who don't come from a journalistic background who really power our work at Radio Free Asia, who haven't gone to Columbia Journalism School, who haven't, these advanced degrees or impressive internships, probably never even thought about themselves as a journalist until a little bit later in their lives, because they thought, there's a story that needs to be told, and they're not being able to do that in their own countries. So how can I help? And it's really this call to duty which produces some of the most amazing work, and it would be a shame to lose all that talent. And it would be a shame for those folks to not be able to pursue a career and work for another organization, whether it's Reuters, whether it's any of the other groups that are at this, AFP, there's so many great ones. Also, I would say this is something to think about is, in the future for both Voice of America, US funded media, maybe there are things that are here to stay. Maybe there's we have to kind of reckon with a changing landscape, and this is probably something that collectively, I think all of us should think about. How could we project and create some sort of consortium, media consortium that either provides grants, provides help, may resemble a news organization of itself, but takes on a different role, and especially this kind of work. This is I don't think that, Radio Free Asia, VOA, could do this work without that talent, but I don't think people could do that without us behind them, backing them. I know that RFA has many times been in the crosshairs, and Antoine was right to bring up all of those cases that we are really kind of wrestling with, and I'm on a text thread with Antoine and others at RSF. We thank them for bringing attention and the help on the back end of this issue. But even though we're in the crosshairs, there's this idea that we're a U.S. organization, that there's a little bit of a sense of protection, that we are in close touch with the embassies, we're in close touch with the State Department, with, of course, international bodies, but we have America kind of behind us, and that helps our reporters. I don't think we would be able to do stories in Myanmar, for example, about the pig butchering, cyber scam centers, all these types of things, if we were just a small outfit. I'm not trying to discredit what small outfits are doing, because they're doing amazing work too in Irrawaddy, but I think this is a resource, and this is backing, and that losing that kind of puts people in further danger, makes them less able and capable to do that type of amazing work that needs to be done.
Okay. Others have any comments? Floor is open.
Well, maybe just to jump in, there are two goals here. Indeed, one is not to waste talents. The most urgent one is to ensure safety for many of them. none of this is ensured and secured. A lot of efforts are needed, and the challenge is really big. This is why we turn to any type of interlocutor, first of which the Congress. I mean, within Congress, there are some members of Congress that cannot be not sensitized to the risks and the problem. Hence the letter yesterday with Penn and others in the ongoing advocacy efforts. Also turning to other to democratic countries, especially the EU. As you saw from last week, the head of RFERL was in Brussels, and there was some very good statement from the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Political support, at least, expressed. But just let's have in mind what happened with the massive exodus from Russia of 93 independent newsrooms after 4 March 2022. It was a huge effort to be able to help 66 of those media to resume work from exile and continue reaching out to their audience. And in that case, there was a huge support mobilized from many democratic governments all together. I'm not sure we succeed having the same type of mobilization now. And what I'm sure of is there's a lot of work that we need to be doing and continue to be doing to reach that, to achieve that goal.
I will also say that we've seen a massive exodus of Burmese media after the military coup, which is something that Gwen Robinson and many others were working on, allowing them to reestablish themselves in Chiang Mai. I know many of them ended up working for Radio Free Asia, although others, of course, working for DVB or Myanmar Now, Frontier, and others. And, I mean, essentially you've had the exiled media reconstituted largely in Chiang Mai, but also in Mae Sot. And, I mean, I guess the one question I would ask before we turn again to the floor is, how many people are we talking about who are at risk of being deported from the United States, both from RFA and from VOA? And, what measures are being taken to try to prevent that?
If I may, I can jump in. We have about 37 people who are all facing deportation. So at Radio Free Asia, we don't use the J1 visa. We use actually a lot of times H-1Bs and other work-related visas. So if we're not able to pay them or they don't have a job, they go into a 60-day window, I believe, to find another job or sponsorship. And then if they're not able to find that, they have to return home. And this could be very detrimental, of course, to people who are from Vietnam, who are from Cambodia, who are already on some sort of list. Yesterday, I spent the day going to House and Senate offices on the U.S. Congress, with one of our journalists, and he expressed, a lot of concern. He's actually gotten a phone call since Bloody Saturday happened from one of the embassies, and they had his personal number and they called him, which was, I won't divulge the contents, but it was not a veiled threat. And it was very clear what the intention was. So we're very concerned about those folks. Then there's people who come from countries that are not necessarily, it's not that they're targeted now, but who knows, if it's a country in Central Asia and it's somebody from our Uyghur service and they have to go back, would China contact that government and say, we want to extradite? I mean, these places are, I wouldn't call them havens or safe zones, but they're considered not threatening until that changes. I mean, certainly with Thailand and what happened with the Uyghurs who were forcibly deported to China, that's also something that we are very concerned about. So what we're doing right now is we're advocating, we're working behind the scenes, but if our organization falls, if we are not getting our funding and we have to shutter completely, ignominiously, I might add, because we probably have to go bankrupt and things, there's really not much we can do. We're even in less of a position. Antoine and others, we have added a journalist safety position in the last 5 years to our staff. And this is particularly to kind of manage these cases, to advocate, behind the scenes, back channel them with all sorts of groups and such. RSF included, CPJ, Human Rights Watch. I know, Phil, you have been part of those efforts as well. But even on the back end, just finding legal aid for people's families who are in these countries, or there are various things that we can do. We won't be in a position to do any of that.
Steve Herman here. My understanding is at VOA we have approximately 50 J1 visa holders in total.
Right. Tommy?
Our Antoine here. Our estimate is to date is 84 journalists based in the U.S. on work visas. 84 USAGM media. I mean, it's all together. But this is really ongoing work we're doing. But it's a huge number.
84 J1 visa holders. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I was just going to add my perspective from reporting in Asia. I just, RFA, some of the work that they've done is incredible. The nitty-gritty reporting that a lot of journalists can't get to in certain countries which don't allow a free press. I'm always impressed. I'm always reading what they have to do. And honestly, I mean, whether the US government can continue that in the future, but someone has to pick that up because the talent is I mean, all journalists appreciate the RFA and what they do. And, some of the stories that would never be told, certainly to Western journalists, are picked up by RFA. And I think, it's crucial that they survive in some aspect because, people's stories won't get out if they don't.
Yeah. I mean, I actually recall some phone calls I've received from RFA journalists where I find out about a religious freedom case in Laos where some pastor in some village has been beaten up or arrested. And, there was no way for me when I was working for Human Rights Watch to be able to find that out. I mean, it's because they were operating in Laos and had the sources to find out. So issues of religious freedom, particularly attacks against Christians in Laos, has been an ongoing issue, and RFA was breaking those stories.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, board member Jonathan Head, who's not here tonight, BBC, he will say local journalism is real journalism, and RFA really would get them stories out that you would just never find. And I think that's, especially for communities like you mentioned, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, some of these countries, you would, I mean, as a Western journalist, or, any journalist, it's so difficult to get them local stories. So yeah, RFA needs to survive for sure somehow. Someone needs to pick it up.
Antoine here, or RFA, including on China. I mean, if I remember well, RFA was the first to alert about Uyghurs incarcerations and about Tibet violations, ongoing work. And so even the Trump's decision makes just no sense in that regard, considering the administration's positioning on China. Makes no sense. It should be considered very important, or even national interest, not to say security, but to have free pluralistic journalism maintained to try to cover the situation in China. It makes just no sense. This is why it's something like ideologically driven, or maybe even worse than that, or maybe the next step, it would be to take over USAGM with Kerry Lake and turn it into a propaganda media. So that maybe would be the next step.
okay. Thank you. Question next question from the floor.
Yes, Sam Wright, club member. I have great sympathy for everything you've said and your circumstances, but I'm going to try to answer Mr. Robertson's question by reading some from Kurt Davis Jr. in an article in Asia Times right now. The title of his essay is "Trump is Refining, Not Abandoning American Soft Power." So if you bear with me, I'll just read a couple of paragraphs, because everything you suggested is the reason, he says is not the reason. So what he says is, for decades, the United States projected global influence through soft power, the ability to shape world affairs through ideological attraction rather than military force. In a world where China and Russia wield economics to expand their spheres of influence, America needs a strategy prioritizing tangible returns over ideological appeal. Trump is refining, not abandoning American soft power. Critics decry the shift as abandonment of American leadership. They're missing the point. What we're addressing isn't a reckless dismantling of American influence, but rather a necessary recalibration for a world where the old rules no longer apply. Now, there's a couple of other paragraphs, but I can stop there.
You want a reaction to that?
If I'll finish now?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're always welcome. I can address some of the issues later if you want, but basically he's saying that deficit spending is no longer cuts it, and that the economic world is being lost, and this requires the refocusing of the task of the soft power.
So you want people's reaction to that statement?
No,
Sure.
I don't know about people's reaction. I want that this is answering your question to address it to them, which is here is a member of the Atlantic Council, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, saying, no, it's none of these things. It's not that you haven't performed well. It's not that it's not an honest effort that you've done, but that this is the old way, and there's a necessity to do this new way.
Okay. So to the panel, what do you think of that argument? Your reaction to the argument that Sam just mentioned that was quoted by that person?
Phil, if I may, I mean, there is some validity to maybe the idea that, these organizations, VOA, Radio Free Asia, I mean, by our moniker, even though we were created in the 90s, at the tail end of the Cold War, there is this sort of sense of the Cold War, and I think Steve was talking earlier about, the necessity of VOA after World War II. The war is over. Why do we still need this service? I mean, there is probably, this is a larger historical shift, than just dealing with this decision and this moment and our organizations, the world and the world order since the last 80 years, post World War II, and the idea of the Cold War and what happens next. I still think that, there's an expression I heard one time about fleeing forward. I still think it's important to kind of think about what is the value, what are the things that we could take from these organizations and continue. There's probably a lot in our history and that we are all proud of, but there's a lot that going forward we still know is needed. And whether it's covering Rohingya and the plight of the Rohingya in Burma, or whether it's covering an earthquake that's happening and we don't have people on the ground, whether it is somehow a demonstration of the U.S.'s engagement or something in parts of the world. I mean, we don't really try to think about journalism as the term soft power, and I think Antoine mentioned national security, but it is, it is sort of informing this information space. Certainly Radio Free Asia was created with a very kind of strong mission of pushing back, long before on the terms of disinformation and malign influence were used with China, but we were created to do especially just that. and that still has validity going forward. I'm not saying that there always should be space to rethink, to recalibrate, and to kind of approach things newer. I think also, though, we have to probably look, realistically, if we're going to have this political backlash or these questions, like what can we do in the future, and what can we do collectively as media organizations? And again, I come back to the idea of how do we finance this? How do we get people? How do we protect them? And there's a lot of questions that need to go forward, even if the U.S. is not as committed to this or committed to the, I wouldn't say older ways of doing things, but the traditional ways of doing things.
Okay. Have other comments from the panel?
Phil, Antoine here, Phil. I'm sorry, but I will need to run. And just as a conclusion from my side, you referred earlier to those journalists from Myanmar displaced in Chiang Mai in particular, and we recently opened a press freedom support project based in Chiang Mai, and I think, in fact, they represent the future a lot. We were all very positively shocked by their courage and how we discovered how much from Chiang Mai they continue reporting, going back into Myanmar, reporting, informing, taking amazing risks, and we do all we can to help reduce the risks, but it's very modest what we can do. And I think the need and appetite for trustworthy information is extremely vibrant and strong, notwithstanding those very growing obstacles, manufactured disinformation via Twitter and platforms, in addition to political repression by those regimes. I want to keep an optimistic message in the end, because I'm not a journalist myself, I'm a lawyer, and I'm extremely shocked positively by this obstination, this steadfastness in reporting from journalists, and this is what definitely we need to build on. I don't know what the way will be, if it will be possible to have maintained the key USAGM medias we're referring to right now, and RFA, VOA, RFERL, etc., or trying to find alternative ways to support them and have them continue work. But clearly the information challenge has now become turned to be the very center, one of the very centers of the global confrontation. So there is a part to play here.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel? No? Okay. Question from the floor.
Thank you, Phil. Michael Kyotis, club member, former journalist. I used to work for a state broadcaster, the BBC World Service, and I was used to government censorship. We were not allowed to interview the IRA, members of the Republican group in Northern Ireland as we were covering the Northern Ireland conflict. That's not the issue. I want to take this opportunity to actually ask Steve, in his role as a former White House correspondent, how does all this reflect on or be seen in the context of press freedom in America today? Because I just returned from the United States. It was a very scary experience. I just wanted to get your view, quite apart from the international aspect of broadcasting, as how you see the media environment in the US at the moment. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I am still technically employed by the Voice of America, so I have been deliberately limiting my answers to the situation at VOA, USAGM, and my personal situation as well. There are many, many better qualified people who can talk about the wider issue, Antoine, for example, of the United States, and when I'm no longer in my current position, I will be speaking out on that particular issue.
Antoine, do you want to say something about press freedom in the United States?
Well, yep. We've been running quite a number of analysis in addition to the World Press Freedom Index, which is an ongoing analysis, and wait for the next edition to be published on 2nd May. But just have a look through our journalistic investigation on the media in swing states during the campaign. And I was very impressed by how bad the situation is. One sign of hope actually came from local media in some swing states, not all of them. But indeed, the ranking is not good, the situation is not good, the pressure is super high. And when mega tycoons and media owners, because of vertical concentration like Bezos, do what they do with the op-ed pages in the Washington Post, then the pressure is still more. What was striking also lastly, and which is not a very optimistic sign, is how media, not to say mainstream media, but media, have been marginalized, pushed on the side during the campaign. The whole campaign, as we know, as you know, you've been following this, all of you, I'm sure, like we have, the whole campaign happened not in mainstream media, but with influencers. This is not journalism, with influencers and on some social networks, full stop. And so all these are signs that the situation is far from being healthy.
Thank you. I have one question actually for Rohit. I understand that there's, Bainar News, which is one of the sister reporting networks of RFA, which covers Thailand and Malaysia, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, is also facing problems. Can you talk about it, a little bit about what Bainar News is facing?
Yes, Phil, thank you. So Bainar is a little bit different than Radio Free Asia. It's kind of a micro brand. So whereas we have at any given time, not now, but about 40 people in our Mandarin service, for example, Bainar will have just several people working with an editor in DC and then stringers on the ground. They're very active in Bangladesh, especially last summer. We had a lot of stringers who were on the ground there. We have also folks in Indonesia, Thailand, other countries that are not so much in the model of Radio Free Asia, like closed country kind of reporting in the toughest, worst media environments, but countries that are nonetheless susceptible. And Bainar extends into the Pacific, and it complements a lot of the work. I mentioned Bangladesh, and we have obviously a Burmese service. So, for example, covering the Rohingya is something that we can do then from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh and work together. We've had to just recently start announcing that we have to furlough staff. Starting this Friday from Bainar, we were hoping it has a slightly different funding situation that we could extend this, but we're not assured about that either. So they are kind of following the same route that RFA is, where we have the majority of people furloughed right now. And again, we're also ending a lot of those contracts. We're trying to look at ways, particularly the Pacific work, which is obviously of great strategic interest. We can go back to Congress, we can go back to the administration and say, look, this is something that's so needed, and it takes, we're talking 2-3 people, who are full-time staff working with a handful of stringers on these different Pacific island countries that extend such a vast region, and yet it's difficult to even come up for funding for that to continue. So they're on life support as well, to answer your question, Phil.
Right.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Yeah, I note that there was a big diplomatic initiative to try to expand the U.S. presence in the Pacific. I know there was a number of different embassies and opened in the last year or two, I guess. So it's interesting that that's now being cut. Are there any more questions from the floor? If not, do any of our panelists have a few final words to share before we sign off for the evening?
I would just like to say thank you, everyone, everywhere, for your support and interest. It's obviously an extremely difficult time for the journalists of USAGM, and the outpouring of support from fellow journalists, from NGOs, from some lawmakers, and some countries has been very heartening. And I would just say, look at those who are celebrating the demise of U.S. international broadcasting. If it was not effective, why would they be cheering this in the halls of the Kremlin, inside the Chinese Communist Party? I think that answers the question about effectiveness. And if this vacuum continues to grow, the Voices of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, all the other entities that have been mentioned, that vacuum is going to be filled by voices from Russia and China who have a different ideology about the purpose of journalism in media. We've never said we're perfect at the Voice of America. No one said that there's not need for reform, for improvement. But to, in one swoop, shut down all of these organizations. There was a mention to recalibrating soft power of the United States. It's not being replaced by anything. So that's not a recalibration at all. That is a termination. And we're already seeing the damage to the reputation of the United States by these shutdowns. Our audiences were given no warning, no explanation, just silence. And as I said in the 60 Minutes interview that aired on Sunday evening here in the United States, when Bill Whitaker, former Tokyo correspondent of CBS, asked me, what do I think the audiences are thinking? My answer was, and I have to assure you this was an ad-lib moment, what the hell is going on in the United States? Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve just said something so eloquent and well stated. Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to say, underscore one thing, one point. Look who's celebrating. I think that's exactly the issue here. Look who's happiest by this move, and who's the most pleased and expressing that, freely. So that is a demonstration of the effectiveness. Unfortunately, the effectiveness is also look who's in the crosshairs, even with this situation. If we weren't being effective in our work, why do dictators and despots, why does the CCP fear or feel the need to crack down on our people and our reporters, on our sources, everybody who's involved really in a news gathering effort that fuels our work? So with that, I just want to say thank you to Phil, and thank you to everybody at the FCCT, and of course Antoine and Tommy, all the panelists on this.
Thank you.
What we're seeing is the U.S. administration now leading by the worst possible example. 5 minutes ago, again, there was an AFP dispatch explaining how this example is propagating to so many countries. You're in Asia. This is expanding to Serbia, to Georgia, to Hungary, to Slovakia. It's really the worst situation for people's right to information. There has been a complete attack on rule of law. We have seen kind of a change in the hierarchy of legal norms, where we see tweaks prevailing over the Constitution. There has been a complete change and attack on the separation of powers, including in the cases we're discussing right now. There has been conflict of interest that is now taken as a model and promoted as a model in practice. So for sure, this VOA, RFA, RFERL battle for their own ability to continue practicing journalism, reporting information to their audience is absolutely key, of course, for themselves, for those media, but far beyond for trustworthy journalism to prevail worldwide. And it's a very, very symbolic. I don't want to be too emphatic, but it's very clearly a battle that needs to be really fought and won as much as we can win it, far beyond the situation in the US. So see you next time for a follow-up to this one, hopefully.
Over to you, Tommy.
No pressure. I don't Thanks all for coming. I just hope that there might be some similar media outlets that might, pick up the space, fill that space to fill in the sort of the reporting that VOA, RFA have done. Certainly in Asia, I think, obviously, I'm going to favour reporting over here because I live here and I've been here for a while. It's so vital to have press freedom over here and to have outlets and information. And I just hope that, other outlets can pick it up. I hope that in some form, the journalists who've been working at VOA and RFA can produce their work in another format and for another outlet, because there's too much talent to waste. And let's see what happens.
Okay. I would note for the record that the FCCT did invite a representative of the U.S. Embassy to appear to discuss these issues. They declined to appear. So, we wanted to have the U.S. Embassy here to explain what is happening, what is the policy of the U.S. government. Again, they declined. So that's where we are. Thank you very much for coming to the FCCT. Thank you very much for our panelists joining us online from various parts of the world. And we'll continue to follow the news of the various lawsuits and other efforts to try to get you back on air. Thank you again, and good night from the FCCT.
Cheers, Phil. Sorry.